Dear colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, fellow victims and beneficiaries of the DPOP program. Just as we could not escape the cycle of poverty, famine, and war without murdering 5 billion babies through abortion and preventing the moment of conception for an additional 10 billion babies since 1945 by poisoning the entire food system with endocrine disruptors, we will not be able to prevent falling back into the cycle of poverty, famine, and war without euthanizing ourselves at the age of 75 from now until the end of this century, by which time we must reduce the global population to a sustainable 4 billion people. Do I have your attention now? If so, let me repeat. Just as we could not escape the cycle of poverty, famine, and war without murdering 5 billion babies through abortion and preventing the moment of conception for an additional 10 billion babies since 1945 by poisoning the entire food system with endocrine disruptors, we will not be able to prevent falling back into the cycle of poverty, famine, and war without euthanizing ourselves at the age of 75 from now until the end of this century, by which time we must reduce the global population to a sustainable 4 billion people. Our governments are trying to prevent the inevitable by first replacing the native populations of developed nations with immigrants from the developing world while we go extinct, and second, by continuing to poison our citizens with covert chemical and biological methods of depopulation and shut down our reproductive systems entirely, which also leads to our extinction. They are committing these crimes instead of legislating a population stabilization law and limit our fertility, lifespan, and population size by law to achieve a numerically and structurally stable population, and by extension, sustainability, which is the only rational option. It is the only rational option because it is the only one that will solve our existential problems. Furthermore, it provides a permanent, legal, ethical, and equitable solution to the population problem and, by extension, to all other problems created by a constantly growing population. Wow! You are undoubtedly thinking, this is a strong opening. Where is he going from here? 3 choke points or bottlenecks force us to legislate a population stabilization law. First, the financial limits of society to support old age dependency ratios higher than 20%. We are now at 40% throughout the developed world, thus twice higher than is sustainable, which is why governments run huge deficits and have mortgaged our children's and grandchildren's future with debt levels that can never be repaid. We have at most 5 years left to address this before we suffer a catastrophic financial and economic collapse that will deliver us straight into the abyss of abject poverty. This problem can only be addressed with mandatory euthanasia at age 75 without exception and without delay or hesitation, until the old age dependency ratio falls below 20% in every country without exception. Consequently, circa 200 million people will have to be euthanized throughout the developed world from now until 2050, and an additional 1.5 billion people across the developing world from 2050 until 2100, since they will reach the last phase of the demographic transition, the phase characterized by inverted population pyramids around 2050. The old must make room for the young if mankind is to avoid falling back into the poverty trap and reverse the current acceleration of the demographic downward spiral. The young cannot thrive and prosper, let alone reproduce and raise offspring, while supporting crushingly high old age dependency ratios that are set to double over the next 3 decades and rise from the current 30 to 40% to 70 or even 80%, which means that in the future one taxpayer will have to support two pensioners. Keep in mind that when the first national state pension system was created in Germany in 1889 under Chancellor Otto von Bismarck, circa 100 workers supported one pensioner. The statutory retirement age was set exceptionally high at 70 years, while the average life expectancy at that time was around 48 years, and therefore very few people actually survived to collect their benefits. This created a very high base of young contributors relative to a tiny number of retirees. By 1950, the ratio of workers per retiree had changed dramatically to just 6 to 1, and today it is just 2 to 1. Once the unemployed, women on maternity leave, and black market employment are factored in. By 2035, there will be just one worker supporting one pensioner. The system, however, will collapse long before then, since no economic system can indefinitely support old age dependency ratio above 40%, let alone higher. Policymakers are currently attempting to solve the demographic, financial, and economic problems caused by unsustainably high and growing old age dependency ratios with AI. Their hope is to build enough AI agents and humanoid robots to make up for the shortage of human labor, but this is a fool's dream, since scaling up AI to the level required to triple productivity necessitates a tripling of energy production and freshwater use, neither of which is possible, especially now that we are in the midst of transitioning from fossil fuels to renewable energy sources, a process encapsulated by the term decarbonization. This brings us to the second choke point, energy. The global population, now 8.3 billion strong, consumes the planet's fossil fuels, a non-renewable resource, at an increasingly rapid pace. We have at most 20 years until fossil fuels become too hard to extract and therefore too expensive to burn, and at most 40 years until they will be entirely depleted. The energy return on investment, the so-called EROI, for fossil fuels has plummeted by approximately 75% to 90% since its peak in the mid-20th century. In the early 1900s and until about 1950, the global EROI for conventional oil and gas and coal, it was as high as 100 to 1, meaning that for every unit of energy invested in drilling or mining, society received up to 100 units of usable energy in return. By 2025, the EROI has dropped to 15 to 1 or even 6 to 1, depending on the type of oil. The record shows that the global EROI for fossil fuels decreased by an annual rate of about 1.6%, as extraction shifted toward unconventional sources like deep offshore drilling, tar sands, and hydraulic fracturing. The problem of fossil fuel depletion can only be addressed by reducing the global population by half by the end of this century, while at the same time transitioning to renewable energy sources as though our lives depended on it, because they do. This transition cannot be accomplished for 8.3 billion people due to resource scarcity, lack of capital, and insufficient time, but it can be accomplished for 4 billion people. Keep in mind that despite using fossil fuels for 250 years, roughly 1 billion people still have no electricity, and an additional 2 billion people have woefully insufficient electricity. This being the case, no one should expect to transition the entire global population to renewables in the 25 to 35 years we have left, until we deplete the last known reserves of oil and gas. It is impossible, which is why the Trump administration has seized Venezuela's oil and gas reserves, the largest reserves in the world, and is in the process of seizing Iran's too. Venezuela holds the world's largest proven oil reserves at 300 billion barrels, accounting for about 17% of global totals. It also ranks in the top 10 globally for natural gas, holding up to 200 trillion cubic feet of proven reserves. Iran holds the world's third largest proven oil reserves of approximately 210 billion barrels and the second largest natural gas reserves of circa 34 trillion cubic meters, thus over 10% of global oil and 15% of global natural gas resources. The battle for the last remaining fossil fuel reserves has therefore already started. Over the next 2 decades, it will intensify, and absent a population stabilization law, it will result in World War III and in mutually assured nuclear annihilation. The developing world must reduce its total fertility rate to below replacement level if it is to have a chance of transitioning to renewable energy sources in the 25 to 35 years of fossil fuels we have left. In addition, the first to industrialize must be the first to decarbonize if the developing world is to have sole access to the remaining fossil fuels in order to develop with the cheapest type of energy available, as the developed world did. The engineered COVID pandemic and the depopulation by vaccination strategy unleashed behind its cover has lowered the total fertility rate to below replacement level for 71% of the global population. Prior to it, circa 45% of the global population lived in countries with total fertility rates below the replacement level of 2.1 children per woman. This extraordinary reduction in fertility, however, came at a huge cost to society, constitutes crimes against humanity at a scale hitherto unknown, and may only be temporary since the vast majority of the global population no longer trusts the medical establishment or their governments, whose mantra, safe and effective, has proved to be false. As a result, few are getting boosted. A permanent reduction in fertility can only be accomplished through a global population stabilization law, and accomplish it we must. Otherwise, the end of oil will trigger universal famine, global conflict, and mass death, since there are no easy alternatives to energy derived from fossil fuels. Even if fusion energy becomes possible tomorrow, there is not enough time to scale it up globally. Alas, scientists have been working on fusion energy for 90 years with little to nothing to show for it. Scaling up nuclear energy to replace fossil fuels, as has been suggested, is also a pipe dream. Replacing all global fossil fuel use requires generating roughly 100,000 terawatt-hour of continuous energy. Assuming a typical 1.5 gigawatt-hour modern nuclear reactor with an 85% capacity factor, it would take roughly 7,500 to 10,000 reactors, which is a massive leap from the roughly 415 reactors that are operational globally today. Since it takes 10 to 15 years to build a nuclear reactor, a nuclear power plant, we are already out of time for a nuclear power solution. The third choke point is caused by man's limitless aspirations clashing with the planet's finite resources. People everywhere want to reach ever higher standards of living, which is not possible for 8.3 billion people without destroying the planet and denuding it of life. The global population already far exceeds the resource limits of our planet and its ability to regenerate the vital natural resources we take from its bowels and to heal itself from the chemical poisons we pour into its ecosystems, which is why we have already transgressed 7 of the 9 planetary boundaries, the biophysical limits that regulate the stability and life support systems of the Earth, putting all life on Earth at risk, including our own, and depleting the vital natural resources on which our civilization depends: fresh water, fossil fuels, oil, gas, and coal, topsoil, and critical minerals like lithium, cobalt, and rare earth elements that are crucial for the global energy transition. According to the Overshoot Index, mankind is 4 billion people in overshoot, meaning that the human population has twice as many members than the planet can sustainably support, and we're still adding 70 million a year. Consequently, per capita resource consumption highlights striking global disparities, with high-income regions vastly outpacing developing nations in energy, materials, and ecological footprints. The material footprint of advanced economies is unsustainable, as it exceeds the global biocapacity, while that of developing economies is woefully inadequate, as it fails to provide even a modicum of safety, let alone comfort, to most of their citizens. Whatever specific indicators we're looking at, the disparity is huge, be it ecological footprint, material footprint, or energy consumption per capita. The ecological footprint measures how much biologically productive land and water an individual requires to produce the resources they consume and absorb their waste. On the highest end, there is Singapore with 10.1 global hectares per person, while on the lowest end are Eritrea and Timor-Leste with just 0.5 global hectares per person, a 20-fold difference. The global average ecological footprint is approximately 2.6 to 2.8 global hectares per capita. The material footprint tracks the total amount of raw materials, biomass, fossil fuels, metals, and minerals extracted globally to service a region's final domestic demand. Wealthy regions like North America and the EU have material footprints of circa 27 metric tons per person, while many developing nations often average just 2 metric tons per person. In total, high-income countries extract and consume over 13 times more raw materials per capita than low-income nations. The global average, incidentally, is 12.6 metric tons per person. Last but not least, the total energy consumption per capita gauges the average kilowatt hours used by a single individual across transport, heating, and industry. While the average person in Canada uses circa 96,000 kilowatt hours per year, and the average US citizen consumes 76,000 kilowatt hours per year, which is 3.5 times the global baseline, the average person in India consumes just 7,700 kilowatt hours per year, and the entire continent of Africa averages just 3,900 kilowatt hours per year per person. The difference between the highest and the lowest nations in energy consumption can be 100 times larger. If the entire global population of 8.3 billion people were to adopt the consumption patterns and standard of living of the average US citizen, we would need roughly 5 Earths to sustain that level of demand. We have until the middle of next century to bring human aspirations in balance with the planet's finite resources, which requires a reduction of the global population to circa 2 billion. Every government on Earth and every international organization knows this, but have kept this knowledge secret in order to continue to pursue depopulation by covert means, since too many obstacles stood in the way of an open population control program. Obstacles that I have removed over the past 15 years through extraordinary perseverance and personal sacrifices, but also because those in charge want to continue to enjoy their privileged positions and exempt themselves from measures they impose on the rest of us, measures that constitute crimes against humanity and genocide. The obstacles I have removed are: 1. The secrecy and deception that made covert methods of depopulation possible and trapped the military-industrial complex into the unenviable position of having to sterilize, sicken, and prematurely kill the rest of us in secret so that governments can preserve the illusion of democracy and the rule of law. 2. The obstinacy of organized religions to change or at least soften their doctrines and dogmas with respect to abortion, contraceptives, and euthanasia, thus freeing them from their own lies and hypocrisy. 3. The imprisonment of the political class by the operating motto by mutual coercion, mutually agreed upon, which made all our heads of state and government, as well as all our religious leaders, accomplices in crimes against humanity and genocide. And fourth and last, by bridging the knowledge gap between those who govern us and the general population, which has required that I confront people's ignorance, prejudices, self-interest, and indifference all by myself, by being the torchbearer of truth in a world of lies, and by telling people what they need to know and not what they want to hear. I put a stop to the monopolization of this knowledge by a privileged few, knowledge that makes or breaks civilizations, and have made it the patrimony of mankind. It is now up to all of us to educate the global population and endow it with the moral instruments necessary to not only assume responsibility over the sacred task of limiting human life on the planet to a level our planet can support, but to also willingly make the sacrifices required by the dire predicament we are in. I did all of the above virtually alone. It is now time for all of you to do your part and inculcate in the general population 3 traits that no one is born with, but henceforth no one will die without: planetary consciousness, global conscience, and the genetic sentience, the gifts of Sanctum, the latest revelation of the divine. There can be no global government without a single religion, since global governance requires 3 instruments that the current organized religions have failed to provide: planetary consciousness, without which harmony with nature is impossible; global conscience, without which harmony among humans is impossible; and genetic sentience, without which harmony between generations is impossible. The age of monkey man religions, wasting humankind's energy and resources on non-existent gods and outdated doctrines and dogmas that do more harm than good, is over. First, harmony with nature requires that we establish equilibrium between people and resources, equilibrium between our species and all other species, and equilibrium between our energy needs and the planet's. And none of this can be accomplished without planetary consciousness, the ability to consider the well-being of the planet and all life on Earth as dearly as we consider our own well-being. Harmony with nature is the first tenet of Sanctum and the highest duty of earth angels. It is expressed in the following commandment: love nature as you love yourself, for you are a part of it, and any harm you do to nature, you do to yourself. A global consciousness is the logical, necessary, and natural step in our evolution from social beings to planetary beings, from beings capable only of a social conscience, of concern for other human beings, to beings capable of a global consciousness, of awareness that we are one with all life on Earth. Just as we are separate and different individuals physically, but one socially, likewise, we are separate and different beings biologically, but one ecologically. To love nature as you love yourself requires that we internalize this awareness of our oneness with all life on Earth and externalize it in everything we do in order to achieve intraspecies, interspecies, intergenerational, and intertemporal unity in Sanctum. Intraspecies unity is the genetic, cultural, and linguistic glue that binds the living members of our species together into communities, brotherhoods, nations, races, and faith groups. For the first time in human history, we are forced to outgrow the divisions of nation-states and ethno-religious groups and see humankind as one indivisible whole that can only survive into the future if we forge a common destiny. We are separate individuals physically, but one socially. Interspecies unity is the ecological and symbiotic glue that binds the living members of our species with all other species into ecosystems and environments that exist because of our combined interaction and interdependence, as well as the linking of biotic and abiotic components through nutrient cycles and energy flows. For the first time, we have come to comprehend that we exist thanks to the prolonged association of all biological species living side by side in mutualistic and parasitic interactions, and that disturbing this natural order leads to the demise of all species, including our own. We are different beings biologically, but one ecologically. Intergenerational unity is the reproductive, existential, and civilizational glue that binds together past, present, and future generations of humans in a continuous evolutionary string that exists and survives only so long as our actions in the present consider future consequences, since what we do today echoes in eternity. For the first time in our evolution, the impact of our numbers and needs is as great as an elemental natural force that, unless brought in harmony with nature's elemental forces, will break our evolutionary string and cause our self-destruction. We are different generations in time, but one in space. Finally, intertemporal unity is the glue of time and space, the space-time continuum, that binds together past, present, and future generations of all living species on Earth in a continuous evolutionary string that exists only so long as the natural order is not disrupted and the planetary boundaries that make life possible are not transgressed. For the first time, our intellect can grasp beyond the present and long into the past and future to understand that we are but one among 8 million other species, and that our 8 billion souls live in a planetary organism with countless trillion cells, animate and inanimate, organic and inorganic, and form a synergetic and self-regulating system that created and maintains the climate and the biochemical conditions that make life possible on Earth. We are separated by time, but inseparable by cause and effect. Our Earth is an indivisible whole, a perfect balance of myriad elements, animate and inanimate, coexisting symbiotically in a state of constant flux of indescribable grace and beauty, a cosmic dance that we will never fully understand and will forever try to understand. Humanity too must become an indivisible whole if we are to reach a state of harmony with ourselves and our biosphere, which shelters us into our Mother Earth from the cruel and our Mother Earth from the cruel emptiness of space. Second, harmony among humans requires that we establish equilibrium between men and women, equilibrium between the wealth of nations, and equilibrium between the rights of people. And none of this can be accomplished without a global conscience, the ability to consider the well-being of mankind as dearly as we consider our own. If we fail to reach harmony among humans, we will succumb to nuclear annihilation or environmental destruction and take the planet down with us. Harmony among humans is the second tenet of Sanctum and the second highest duty of earth angels. It is expressed in the following commandment: love your kind as you love yourself, for you are a part of it, and any harm you do to humankind, you do to yourself. This is the second commandment, the second sacred rule of Sanctum, and the foundation of an expanded social conscience that, for the first time in our history, transcends borders and nations, a greater scale and scope for our existing social consciences that none of us is born with or can henceforth live without. An expanded social conscience is the logical, necessary, and natural step in our evolution from national citizens to global citizens, from people capable only of concern for our fellow nationals to people capable of concern for all human beings on Earth, thanks to the awareness that our civilization is global and depends on people, resources, and technology from across the world, and as such, we are all one, interdependent and interconnected. One species, one nation, one civilization, one destiny. There is only one species on Earth, humans, that threatens the existence of all other life forms we share this planet with, as though we were alien and unsympathetic to any other species but our own. We came to pose this threat by rising above all others and separating ourselves from nature to grow our own food because we grew too many numbers for nature's bounty. It is our numbers that forced us to break away from a hunter-gatherer existence. It is also our numbers, but also our technology, that forced us to break away from an agricultural existence. For as we learned to harness the power of fossil fuels with internal combustion engines, we started to need resources we never needed before to feed our machines. And it is our numbers and rapacious consumption of finite natural resources that is forcing us to reinvent our civilization's sources of energy. For as we erected a civilization based on non-human and non-animal energy, we are rapidly depleting the organic sources of energy that our machines run on. It is therefore imperative that we establish harmony among humans so we do not keep needing more than our planet can give, keep taking what other species need to survive, and keep causing more damage than the planet can regenerate. There must be harmony among humans before we can accomplish harmony with nature. Needing or wanting more than our planet can give leads to scarcity, conflict, and ultimately to our assured mutual annihilation by nuclear war. Taking what other species need to survive leads to the extinction of other species, to a denuded planet, and ultimately to our own demise. And causing more damage and pollution than the planet can regenerate leads to environmental catastrophe and the destruction of all life on Earth, including our own. All three are vicious cycles of our own making, and all lead to never-ending suffering and ultimately to hell. A hell of our own making, the only hell that exists. Third, harmony between generations requires that we establish equilibrium between old and young, equilibrium in resources between generations, and equilibrium in responsibilities between generations. And none of this can be accomplished without genetic sentience, the ability to consider the well-being of future generations as dearly as we consider our own. Absent this quality, people will not accept mandatory euthanasia at age 75 and mandatory limits to fertility. And absent mandatory euthanasia at age 75 and limits to fertility, we are all as good as dead, because we will not make it past the three bottlenecks I have just outlined. Harmony between generations, therefore, is the third tenet of Sanctum and the third highest duty of earth angels. It is expressed in the following commandment: love the unborn as you love yourself, for they are a part of you, and any harm you do to yourself, to your kind, or to the planet, you do to them. This is the third commandment, the third sacred rule of Sanctum, and the foundation of continuity between this and future generations, a greater scale and scope than our existing foresight and consideration, and without which humankind has no future. The health and genetic quality of our children depend on three factors. 1. How sound our own health, genetic quality, and genetic compatibility are when we conceive. 2. How sound the health of the society and the population at large is into which our children are born. And 3. How sound the health of the planet and its ecosystems are. The first factor, how sound our own health, genetic quality, and genetic compatibility are when we conceive, is encompassed by genetics and epigenetics. Good genes produce healthy children. Selection and evolution ensure good genes, and genetic compatibility, which consists of the absence of recessive genes that can cause genetic disorders in offspring, ensure healthy offspring free of congenital diseases. Inheriting good genes, however, is not enough if we abuse our bodies through unhealthy behaviors or toxic environments to the extent that we cause heritable changes to gene activity and expression that will negatively impact our progeny. The second factor, how sound the health of society and of the population at large is into which our children are born, is encompassed by sociology and epidemiology. A poor, chaotic, unstable, violent, famine-plagued, and pollution-ridden society will damage the health, genes, and gene expression of any individuals regardless of their genetic quality. Likewise, populations whose health is intentionally damaged en masse by governments who poison their people with endocrine disruptors inserted in the basic elements of life to sterilize the young, or who prematurely kill the old with lethal vaccines, will cause disastrous epidemiological outcomes in the healthiest people, which is why mankind is now in the midst of an epidemic of non-communicable or chronic diseases. We have leaped from the frying pan into the fire by preventing communicable or infectious diseases to save lives, but causing non-communicable or chronic diseases to limit births and shorten lifespans. The third factor, how sound the health of the planet and its ecosystems are, is encompassed by environmental science and planetary health. A denuded planet with polluted ecosystems will make life harder or impossible for future generations, regardless of their genetic or intellectual endowments. Sterile soils will produce mineral-poor crops with little or no nutritional value. Overfished oceans will collapse critical fish populations and plunge billions into hunger, malnutrition, and famine. Polluted water will contaminate and damage the healthiest individuals. And polluted air will sicken and kill the hardiest people. The health of humankind depends on the state of the natural systems on which it depends. All human-induced disruptions have repercussions on human well-being and ultimately on human health. There can be no healthy mind without a healthy body, and there can be no healthy body without a healthy world. Mens sana in corpore sano in mundo sanum. A healthy mind in a healthy body in a healthy world, that is what a rational and compassionate religion must accomplish. The first, genetics and epigenetics, affects the quality of our offspring before birth and during gestation. The second, epidemiology and sociology, affects the quality of our offspring after they are born and throughout life. And the third, environmental science and planetary health, affects the quality of our offspring throughout life and the survival of future generations. Many people ruin their genes, their genetics, by marrying within the family, or people with inheritable disorders or with inferior or incompatible DNA, or ruin their gene expression, their epigenetics, by bad habits such as smoking, drinking, vaping, overeating, lack of sleep, excessive stress, and deviant sexual practices. Most governments ruin their people's health outcomes, epidemiology, by bad policies such as covert sterilization with endocrine disruptors and mass immunization with mRNA vaccines, or by bad economic policies that keep people poor and stressed, and ruin the health of their society, sociology, by bad laws and bad governance. Last, the entire global population ruins the planet's ecosystems, environment, by bad lifestyles such as driving instead of walking, throwing garbage, excessive consumption, private planes and yachts, dumping industrial waste in the rivers and oceans, plastic pollution, overuse of herbicides, pesticides, insecticides, and fungicides, and 1,000 other forms of environmental abuse. And the planet itself is being destroyed, planetary health, by unsustainable population growth and consumption, deforestation, depletion of aquifers, mass extinction of species, desertification, soil degradation, land system change, and destruction of biogeochemical cycles. The existing religions, or at least some of them, have addressed only one of these 6 causes of misery, namely genetics, and even that poorly, by making consanguineous sexual intercourse and marriage illegal and immoral. Islam did not, and its adherents suffer the consequences of cousin marriages, which are extremely common among Muslims. And Hinduism still continues to push arranged marriages, which prevent nature from doing its job by ensuring genetic compatibility, by allowing communication between pheromones to be the determining factor in how young people choose who to marry. The old religions know only how to prevent the mistakes of the past, but not how to solve the problems of the present, let alone how to preempt the challenges of the future. Genetic sentience, the ability to care for mankind and its well-being and survival as deeply as one cares about his own or her own well-being and survival, is an alien concept to all existing religions. Yet, without genetic sentience, there can be no harmony between generations, and our species will not survive this century, let alone the next. In conclusion, mankind has been trapped in the first vicious cycle, the one that leads to violence against one another and war, forever, because our numbers grew faster than our ability to grow food and build infrastructure. Mankind has become trapped in the second vicious cycle, the one that leads to the collapse of other species and ultimately of our own since last century, because our numbers outgrew the planet's resources and the available land. And mankind has become trapped in the last vicious cycle, the one that leads to environmental catastrophe and the destruction of all life on Earth, including our own, in this century, because our ability to pollute exceeds the planet's ability to cleanse itself of our pollution. We are trapped in these three hells because we lack a religion that is smart enough to liberate us from false thinking, flawed actions, and failed foresight. We are trapped in these three hells because we are prisoners of old religions that give us only false thinking, flawed actions, and failed foresight. They are religions conceived to teach man how to conduct himself within the group for the survival of the group and the exclusion of everyone else, human and non-human, from our consideration. By their very nature, the existing faiths are exclusionary. Sanctum is a religion conceived to teach mankind how to conduct itself within a planet for the survival of all life and the inclusion of all species, human and non-human, in our consideration. By its very nature, it is inclusionary. People are attached to the old faiths by the force of habit, but it is their very habits that we must transcend. They are religions based on human flaws and foibles, stuck in the dirt of human existence, in monkey man thinking, and incapable of rising to earth angel thinking, to the highest realms, those of our magnificent planet and its place in the universe, in God. For we are of the universe and not just of the people. They are religions of stories and miracles, of pomp and ceremony, of formality and habits, of rituals and fear, whereas Sanctum is a religion of solutions and realities, of reason and simplicity, of equilibrium and harmony, of awareness and courage. All existing religions are limited in their compassion and awareness, in their scale and scope, and trapped by their own dogmas and doctrines in a prison of their own making that they cannot escape. Their static nature has arrested our social evolution. Sanctum is not. Sanctum's compassion and awareness, scale and scope are planetary and inclusionary and free us all from old limitations, from the relics of the past. Its dynamic nature propels our social evolution. Our old religions taught us how to be human in conduct, despite being just animal in form. Sanctum teaches us how to be angelic in conduct, despite being just human in form. Sanctum begins where they ended. We are no longer trapped. We now have a religion capable of liberating us from suffering. Thank you.